I just wanted to start out this movement lab to see if you guys have any questions or things about our upper legs that you want to make sure that I address if you have questions or anything before we totally get started. Does anyone have questions or issues at all there?
I'm just working on tight hamstrings, but
yeah. Okay.
I have a long history of issues, so I'm excited for today. No questions though.
Okay. All right. I want to encourage everyone to grab either a firm pillow or something from your couch, something that's not super heavy, but we'll use something. We're going to use it. We're going to hold it between our inner thighs, or a yoga block. If you happen to have a yoga block, that'll be helpful. But I'm just going to sit back a little ways, and let's just sit for a second and just kind of check out your knees. I'll turn this way so it can be seen. And you know, they're a different kind of joint. I'm just going to turn it to speaker view for a second. You know, we've kind of looked at our hip joint, which is a ball and socket joint, right? We've got our acetabulum with this femur bone that kind of can roll and move in all different directions. But our knee is it's a hinge, right? It really can flex and extend, and flex and extend. That's what it's designed to do. And so, you know, it has a little bit of range of motion other directions, but really it's just supposed to flex and bend. But it always kind of feels good. It's nice to start when we're focusing on our knees, is even just to kind of feel all the things that come together there on your knee. So you can feel your quadricep muscle above your knee. You can even kind of like finger in underneath it, right at the top of your kneecap, and feel your kneecap. Feel, you know, the sides of your knee, and feel the bones that come in there. You can feel the outer edges of your femur, and you can feel your shin bones as they come in. You can kind of grab a hold of your kneecap and it'll move around, right? It's just kind of, it's one bone that's actually designed to float and move. As a protection for your knee joint, like it's kind of a cushion, so we can actually kneel, right? It just helps with all of that range of motion in our knees. And just do that on the other side. So just kind of be friendly with your knees for a second. Give them a little bit of love as we get started. And so we will kind of work with these muscles and with our knee alignment. And we'll actually do quite a bit of yoga poses, because we'll show how it all applies. And so what's happening in our knees, right, they're this halfway point between our hips and our ankles and our feet. And so if you've got stuff going on in your hip, if you've got tightness in your hip and things, that can show up in your knee. And same with your ankle and shin, things can show up in your knee. But generally, we want these all to be in a line. So if you stand, you know, you've got your hip points here, you know, on the head of your femur bone where it enters into your hip socket. And then you've got your knees and you've got your ankles and your toes. And generally we want them all to be facing the same direction, so that we're not getting any rotation in our knee joint, our knee is always stable. And the interesting thing is that there can be a little bit of rotation. So just sit down for a second, and you can even just kind of look at your knee. And I find this movement easiest to do if like your heel is on the floor. And this may just happen in your imagination, but you may be able to do it. So I want you to kind of keep your thigh stable. You can bring your fingers underneath your knee to the top of your shin, to the top of your tibia there. And see if you can make this movement happen at the top of your shin and just aim your toes out. And so your thigh bone stays stable, and you can just turn your toes out by moving your shin bone underneath your knee. So you do have this little bit of rotational range in your knee, which is good, right? Because we don't want to be super rigid. We need some fluidity. We need to be able to move through our lives. But sometimes what happens is if we chronically externally rotate our toes and our knee isn't in line with our toes, we can put unnecessary pressure on our knee joint and the tendons and stuff all inside of that. So I just want you to see that that's possible, that little motion, and do it with your other. So, you know, it takes muscular strength to do that on purpose, and it may take some brain strength to to be able to move there on purpose, keeping your thigh bone totally stable and just moving underneath your shin. So you've got a little bit of rotational play there. And we want all these muscles around our knees to be strong so that our knee keeps as stabilized. And we want enough flexibility through all the muscles surrounding it that we're not imbalanced. So we don't have like a stronger calf than hamstring that's pulling, or we don't have weak shins and super strong quads, or imbalance between our quads and our hamstrings. The more balance we have in the muscular strength throughout our whole leg, the happier our knees will be. So that's just kind of a fun exploration that, yeah, your knee has all sorts of ranges of motion, but it's primarily a hinge. So when we stand, and especially in a yoga practice, we really want to make sure that our knees are tracking the same direction as our toes, so that your kneecaps are aiming straight forward through the center of your foot in whatever arrangement your legs are in. Okay, so we'll just start with standing, and I just want you to find that. And if you've got your pillow or a block, I'm going to grab that and just kind of check in with the muscular engagement that supports your knees. So you'll take your block and just bring it between your inner thighs, or a light blanket or folded blanket or a pillow. Blocks are nice because they're like a measured width, but whatever you've got, I just want you to hold it between your thighs and kind of find some squeezing there. Okay. And then feel like you're pushing it toward the back plane of your body. And you'll feel that turn your quads on, okay, a little bit, and probably find some opening through the back of your pelvis. And it kind of pushes your femur bones toward the back plane. Just kind of remember that muscular engagement, and inviting all of this deep core engagement. Those inner thighs toward each other and back. And then just kind of lift your toes here and just feel your whole legs wake up. And then you can lower your toes and we'll just sit back in a chair, but I want you to keep this pillow or block just squeezing. And watch where your knees track. So you can have your hands on your hips or just let them be, but just sit and just watch where your knees are tracking. Now, if you've got something narrower than a block, then make sure that your feet and your knees are tracking in the same plane. So just kind of sit back in your chair and come up. And you can play with this. You can feel what feels most stable. So when you sit back and have your weight in your heels, right, is that more stable? Or if you sit down and let your knees come forward, it's going to feel different, right? So generally, we want to use all this leg strength to support our knees. So if you bend and let your knees come forward, right, you're going to feel a little more probably strain on your joints. You'll probably feel this in your ankles. Okay, now sit back with your knees stacked as much over your ankles as you can. It's going to take a little more strength to bend that way, right? And you can feel a little more stable. Just try that a couple more times, just kind of sitting down. We're just turning on our quads and our hamstrings to get ready to move a little more. And notice what happens with your feet, right? Because they really are kind of an extension of your knees. And if you find that external rotation, see if you can find that parallel as we just move and just find little bends in your knees, just 1 or 2 more times. And you can experiment with your upper body too, staying more upright, but finding that engagement. All right, now take out your thing between your knees or between your thighs. Your feet, how they are. So just about sitting bone distance apart, hip points, knees, ankles, all in a line. Toes pointing straight forward. Okay, and now I want you to find that imaginary block where you've kind of got that engagement, inner thighs in, and push your inner thighs back. At the same time, find that, just that support of your transverse abdominis, not clenching, but just support. And now sit back in your chair and come back up. And sit back in your chair and come back up. And then sit back and hold and just find that imaginary block between your inner thighs and pushing it back behind you without letting your knees bow in. Okay, so you kind of just have that imaginary resistance. You can even put your hands there if you need to. But keep your knees tracking the same as your toes and not bowing in or coming out wider. And then go ahead and stand up. So that's just really helpful information for balanced strength throughout your whole leg to protect your knee. Okay, just always think of those things being in a line. Okay, grab your block or pillow or whatever, or folded blanket, again, between your inner thighs. And find that same action, squeeze and push back. And then you can soften your knees a little bit. We're just going to come halfway down into a forward fold. And I want you to squeeze your block and push back. And see that your knees are pointing the same direction as your toes. And then maybe come down a little bit further. You can have your knees bent as much as you need to, so you're feeling this in the back of your legs. So maybe hands stay at your thighs. Maybe you bring your hands to a chair or the seat of your couch. But I want you to feel this forward fold with that engagement of squeezing the block or pillow between your inner thighs, keeping your knees tracking the same direction as your toes. And you're squeezing that block and then pushing it behind you. So you've got this internal rotation of your upper thigh bones. And it really creates a sense of freedom in the back of your pelvis. And just breathe here. Squeezing your block and pushing it back behind you. And then find some engagement of your quadricep muscles. So one thing that's really important to remember and realize with our upper legs especially is the principle of reciprocal inhibition, which just means that our muscles have opposites. And when we engage an opposite, then the muscle opposite to it is encouraged to relax. That's super confusing how I said that. Go ahead and come on up from your forward fold. So, we have a muscle and its opposite. So here on our legs, the muscle on the back of our legs is our hamstrings, and its opposite is our quadricep. And when we engage through the quadricep, it encourages the hamstring to relax and release. And the reverse is true. When we engage through our hamstring, our quadricep is encouraged to relax and release. So we'll do that hamstring stretch again, that forward fold again. Take your thing out. But I want you to remember that engagement. Okay, so you've got these parallel feet and your knees are tracking the same direction as your toes. You're squeezing that imaginary block between your inner thighs and pushing it back toward the wall behind you. You can soften your knees a little bit and come down. And really, you have like this feeling of spreading your sitting bones back. And your inner thighs go in and back as you fold. And we'll just breathe here for another breath. And then go ahead and come on up. All right. So did anything I say bring up any questions for anyone? Is that confusing or?
So when we have the block between our legs and we're pushing it back, is that a rotational thing? Or because whenever I try to do that, I find myself rotating my knees and like my ankles kind of my feet kind of do this because I'm trying to push it back and rotate.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in the hip joint pushing back?
It's more, yeah, it's more something happening of just your femur bones going back and trying to keep your knees stable at the same time. So it's finding that just kind of muscular engagement everywhere.
So it's not rotating so much as pushing the top of the femur bone back.
Yeah, it's more like pushing the top of their femur bone back. When you squeeze it, do you feel your muscles turn on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So at the same time, kind of feel like you're pulling your feet apart from each other without moving them anywhere. Turn on the outer edges of your legs first, and then squeeze your block and push it back. So you've kind of got this spiral action going up your whole leg.
So it is a little bit rotational. If there's spiral, it's a little bit rotational.
It's a feeling of rotational, but nothing's moving. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, just hard to do.
Yeah, it is hard to do. But it does help you kind of feel where.
Okay.
Yeah, and if it feels like I'm pushing this back and everything wants to turn in, right, you're going to balance that by turning on the outside also. So you can start from the ground up and really feel like you're pulling your feet apart first. Turn on your outer edges of your legs, then squeeze your block and turn it back. But what I'm looking for is just all this stabilizing engagement while keeping your feet parallel and your knees tracking the same direction as your toes. So it's just kind of an internal engagement.
Okay, I'll keep playing with it.
Yeah, and it's just helpful. I mean, and when we were in the forward fold, could you guys feel the stability? Could you tell the difference between doing the forward fold, squeezing your block between your legs, and doing it without the block? Could you tell the difference?
Yeah.
Or pillow or whatever it is that you've got. All right. Let's do a little bit of quad stuff. Actually, so if you have a strap or a towel or something to make your arms look longer, we're just gonna check out our active and passive range of motion real quick. And then we'll do some other movements. So come onto your back, and we did this with our hip flexors too, but it's about the same. We're gonna do our hamstrings. Just kind of pay attention to our hamstrings. So start with both your knees bent, feet flat on the floor. And just reach your right leg up. Well, actually, first find all the natural curves of your spine. So make sure you've got the back of your pelvis on the floor, the whole rib cage on the floor, back of your head on the floor, but you've got just a natural space underneath your lower back. Lengthen out your right leg and then just lift it as high as you can, keeping the natural curves of your spine with a straight leg. Okay, so start down here with a straight leg, straight through your knee, and then lift. As high as you can, just using your muscle strength, keeping your knees straight and keeping the curves of your spine intact. And then just try it again with your left leg straight on the floor. So start with both legs straight on the floor and find your natural curves of your spine. And then just lengthen that right leg up as far as it'll go. Just seeing how much space you've got in that hamstring. And then bend your knee, bend both knees, and loop your strap or towel or scarf, or could grab just something, a blanket, something that you can wrap around your foot. Find the natural curves of your spine and then straighten through your leg. And you can let your left leg go long and let your leg be straight. Don't let your lower back push into the floor. Okay. And then relax your leg. So you can even shake it a little bit. See if you can completely relax that right leg and pull it in, passively stretching as far as it'll go. Just to kind of test the difference between your active range of motion where you're moving it with your own muscle strength and your passive range of motion where you can pull that leg. And then we'll just switch sides. So start with your left leg straight. Keep your knee straight. Here. Back of your heart on the floor, back of your pelvis on the floor, but your You've got a little space underneath your lower back, and just lift that leg up as high as it'll go while you're still maintaining your natural curves of your back. So you're not pushing your lower back into the floor, and your pelvis is staying on the floor. Just reach that up with a straight leg, and then try it again with your right leg flat on the floor, and lift that left leg up as far as it'll go. Using your strength and also just the length of that back leg, your quad strength. And then bend both knees and find your passive range of motion there. So find your belt or whatever it is that you have that you can hold on to your foot with. Find the natural curves of your spine. You can lengthen your right leg on the floor, and then make sure your left leg is totally straight, and you can wiggle it out. See if you can completely relax it, okay? And relax your body here. Just use your arm strength to pull this leg as far as it'll go, keeping the space under your lower back and the back of your pelvis on the floor. So once this pushes your lower back down and your pelvis starts to lift, right? That's not hamstring length anymore. That's something else. So keep the back of your pelvis on the floor. And, you know, the more balanced we are, the closer those are to each other. And then we're working on increasing them both together, right? So that your active range of motion is greater and it starts to match your passive range of motion, and you can increase both of those. So that's just a good assessment. We're going to play with our quads now. So come up into a lunge. And if you need to pad your knee whenever you're with your knee down, that's totally fine. You can always just do it on carpet or fold your mat over or have a blanket or something cushy to put your knee on. But we'll just step our right foot forward and just come upright. Okay. We'll play with our quadricep lengthening, right? And our quads just never work without our hamstrings. They always are working together. And we want to work toward balance there. But we're just gonna play with our quad opening. So you'll bend through that left knee and bend it as close as you can to your bum, your heel. Get your heel as close as you can to your bum. I always get a major hamstring cramp here, so if you do, that's pretty normal, okay? And just kind of see how far it'll come. Okay, and then you can come off that and relax a little bit. So that's your active range of motion there with your quadricep lengthening and your hamstring strength. Come back into your lunge, bend that left knee, and if you can reach it, you can just grab it and see how close you can get your heel to your bum. There. And just see the difference between your active range of motion where you're using your muscle strength and your passive range of motion. Go ahead and release that. And we'll just switch sides. So here, bend into your right knee and see how close you can get that heel to your bum without touching your foot. Just using your muscle strength and lengthening through your quadriceps. So you can use your glute, you can squeeze your glute, you can squeeze your hamstring. See how high it'll want to come. And then release that. And get a little crampy there. And then just see what your passive range is. So you can bend into your knee, you can grab your foot, and bring that heel closer in. And then release. So that's just kind of for information. And it's interesting to see, right? And the ability for our quads to open up is related to the strength of our hamstrings. And in our daily lives, we tend to lengthen our hamstrings more than we strengthen them. Or we're just sitting, right, and they're in a shortened position, but not necessarily, oh, let's see. Julie just started sharing your screen. Let's see. There we go. What was I saying? Oh, so sometimes we're short. So they're tight because they're shortened, not because they're super strong. So we do want to work on being able to strengthen our hamstrings and be able to stretch all the way. So we'll do a little bit of that today. Does anyone have any questions or anything? All right, let's lay down in a bridge really quickly. And we'll just do a little bit of hamstring strengthening there. And then we'll come up and do some warrior poses and really talk about alignment of our knees and engagement through our thighs there. So lay down on your back with your knees, both your knees bent, feet flat on the floor. And often when we're doing bridge, we're focusing on our spine, but this time we're just gonna focus on the backs of our legs. Okay. So your knees bent, feet flat on the floor. You can lift your hips up, and then I want you to really feel like you're pulling your heels back towards your shoulders, and just turn on the backs of your legs. And think of the way that your knees are tracking here. And then lower down. Grab your block or pillow or whatever you've got and squeeze it between your inner thighs here. See that your toes are pointing straight forward. You might have to lift your head so you can see. And your knees are going to be tracking the same direction as your toes. Squeeze into your block, lift your hips. And then once you get up, feel like you're pulling your heels back. And then lower down. And then just walk your feet forward about a foot's distance. You're going to push into your feet, squeeze into your block or pillow, lift your hips again and feel like you're pulling your heels back. And just pause. And lower. Now, keep that engagement on your block, and the same thing where you kind of feel like your inner thighs are rotating back, but your knees are staying in track, the same line with your toes. So you're taking this, keeping all of the effort in your legs and not too much in your lower back. Just creep your feet forward a little bit further. And find some relaxation through the back of your spine. Push into your feet, lift your hips, and feel like you're dragging your heels back. Feel the back of your legs turn on. And release. And take your block out, and then lengthen your legs all the way, and just kind of let your feet flop from side to side. You can shake them out a little bit. But I want you to remember that feeling of dragging your heels back. So when we're standing in our warrior poses, you remember that we're always going to want to be turning our hamstrings on to protect our joints instead of just laying into the pose. Okay, I'm just going to do a tiny bit of quad strength also. So you'll come up to kneeling, and if you need to pad your knees, feel free to pad your knees. And find your pillow or block between your inner thighs and squeeze that. We're just gonna turn on our quads, so you can have your hands at your hips. We'll just do this about 4 times. So your feet, I want you to see, like you can have your toes tucked or the tops of your feet on the floor. But what we want is that your ankle is in line with your knee. So if the top of your foot comes to the floor and your toes want to angle in and your ankle is sickling, that's showing that rotation of your shin bone. We want to keep it straight. So either your toes are in line with your heel with the top of your foot on the floor, or your toes are tucked so that your ankle stays in line with your knee. Okay. So that we're not bringing that weird torsion into the knee. And then we're just going to lean back, straight back, and come back up. So any amount, right, you'll feel that effort and use that quad strength to bring you up. Lean back and come up. And lean back and come up. And then just release. So we've turned on and strengthened all those muscles. Let's come up into a lunge to start with. So start with your right foot forward and just take a step back with your left leg. But I want you just to really pay attention to the direction your knees are pointing. Okay, so your right knee is pointing the same direction as your second toe on that right foot. And then I want you to feel like you're spreading your feet away from each other without moving them anywhere, and turn on the outer leg on both of your legs. Keep that action, and then find that like squeezing your block and pushing it back so you get some freedom in the back of your pelvis. Okay. So your back knee is tracking the same direction as your back toes, and our back heel is lifted here in this lunge. So I just want you to feel that. Knees tracking the same direction as your toes, no matter where we are. And you find that pulling your feet apart and then spiraling your inner thighs in and back. Find that lift through your lower belly. And then go ahead and just switch sides. Just come to standing at the top. And we'll step back with our right foot. And your knees are tracking the same direction as your toes. So that left knee is pointing the same direction, just like straight past your second toe. They're in a line. And we're working on just having our knees stacked right over the ankle. You're not bending forward of this. This is really going to just pour pressure into your joints. Here we're engaging with stability. And everything's just stacked up and stable. Okay. So feel like you're pulling your feet away from each other without moving them anywhere. And then pushing your inner thighs back. Your right knee is tracking the same direction as your right toes. Your right heel is lifted. And then find some of that engagement of dragging your left heel back without moving it anywhere. So you're turning on the back of that leg. You're not just hanging into your joints, where you're using your muscular strength to kind of plug in and support. And then go ahead and just step forward and come out of that. So I want you to keep thinking of that knees pointing the same direction as your toes. And we'll step back and open up into warrior two. So I'll turn. We'll start with our right foot forward. Your knee is pointing the same direction as your toes. Step your left foot back. Okay. And so this will depend, like there's a whole bunch of things happening here, right? We've got some rotation happening in our hips. Our knees are the midway point, and then our feet are turning at angles. So your right foot needs to be pointing straight to the right, and your knee is tracking the same direction as your toes. So we're not letting the knee, so in your warrior, you're not going to let your knee come in, right? You've got this feeling of like pulling your feet apart, so you're turning on your outer leg. At the same time, you've got some freedom in your pelvis by this engagement of pushing your inner thighs back. But your knee is tracking right over your toes, the same direction as your toes. And your knee's bent so that your knee is stacked over your heel and ankle. And you've got some engagement where you're pulling that right heel back without moving it anywhere. So you're turning on all these muscles, you're not hanging into your joints. Now your back leg, you always want your knee tracking the same direction as your toes. So we're not going to turn this back foot out, and it probably won't even be straight forward, you know, or perpendicular to the other foot because of what's happening here in your hip and the way your knee is tracking. You're going to turn your toes to point the same direction as your knees. So turn them in as much as they need to, and you can bend a little bit into that left knee and just kind of see, like, which direction, where's my kneecap pointing? And let your toes point that same way. And then you can stand up, and even though our feet are in a different position, we're spread apart, I want you to think about pulling your feet away from each other to turn on your outer legs, and then taking your inner thighs back and zipping up through your lower belly. You can add your arms here. Here's our warrior two. So your right heel is probably in line with either your left heel or arch. And that really depends on what feels good in your hips. There's not a right or wrong. You want this to feel good in your body so that you're honoring your knees and the way that your hips plug into your pelvis. And then feel like you're dragging that right heel back, and then go ahead and come on out. Let's switch sides, and then if you guys have questions, we can kind of go through that. So turn your left toes to the left, okay? And see that your knee is bending same direction as your toes. And so often, right, if you tend to want to knee in, stepped on a slippery. If your knee wants to sink in, you've got to turn on your glutes to support your knee here. Okay, so you've got to engage. So you can think of that pulling your feet apart laterally, even though they're spread this way. I want you to think of pulling them apart to your left foot to the left and your right foot to the right, and then pushing your inner thighs back. Your right knee is tracking the same direction as your right toes. So you'll probably need to turn those right toes in, and you can play with bending that right knee a little bit and just seeing where it's at. And that's totally up to your body, what feels good in your hips. Okay, so you've got that spreading your feet laterally and then pushing your inner thighs back, zipping up your lower belly. And then you can open. So you're using your muscular strength to support your joints here. And make sure, like if you're looking down at your left foot, you can see your left big toe inside of your knee. If your toe is totally covered up by your knee, you really need to engage through that outer leg to track that knee over your toes. Okay, and then go ahead and come out of that. You can shake it out. Does anyone have questions or ahas or anything that come up about that warrior two and feeling that engagement and lining your knee up. All right, so let's do warrior one. So this one's different. It's a lot like a lunge, but we're gonna kind of think about staying facing the short edge of your mat. So step your right foot forward and your left foot back with your heel on the floor. And I generally find that for us to be able to keep our knees the same direction as our toes and our hips comfortable, not pulling weird on the back of our pelvis and our SI joint, that it's a shorter stance. Our legs, our feet are closer together than they are in warrior two. So you can bring your hands to your hips, bend into that right knee, and see that your knee is stacked over your left heel, and your right toes are just pointing straight forward. And then ground through your left heel, and make sure that your toes and your knee, you can even find a little tiny bend in your knee. Your knee is kind of tracking the same direction as your toes. And so if you looked at the relationship of your right heel to your left heel here, there probably would be some space. Your feet are probably closer to hip distance apart than on a tightrope. Because if your right foot is kind of to the right and your left foot is kind of to the left, you're more stable. If you move this right foot in line with your left heel, it'll be more of a balance and a little more tweaking on your pelvis. So you just find what feels good for you, and your knees are tracking the same direction as your toes. Now find like you're pulling your feet laterally away from each other. So pull your right foot and your right foot to the right, left foot to the left. Keep that action. Take your inner thighs in and back like you're squeezing that imaginary block and pushing it back. And then lift up through your lower belly and stack your knee right over your ankle and push back into that left heel. And you can feel that left inner thigh rotating toward the ceiling. Maybe reach your arms up. And then notice what happens with your ribs when we do that. Try to keep your lower ribs down. So you're not finding that hinge point at the base of your rib cage, right? And when you reach your arms up. And then go ahead and release. Shake that out for a second. And we'll do that warrior one on the other side. So a little shorter than your warrior two. Start with your hips square to the short edge of your space, right? You're gonna stay facing forward instead to the side. Step that right foot back. Bend into your left knee. And just see with both of your legs that your knees and your toes are tracking in the same direction. So you'll turn those right toes in a way where your hips are working towards square to the front, and you can get your heel to the ground, and you're not dumping anything into your hip. You're going to use your muscle strength to support your joints. So laterally feel like you're pulling your feet away from each other. So left foot to the left, right foot to the right. And then squeeze your imaginary block between your inner thighs and kind of push your upper inner thighs back. Same time, you're still turning on the outer edges of your legs. So your knee is not going to bow in. Zip up your lower belly. Really root down into your feet. And you can rotate that right inner thigh back. So you push some weight into that right heel. Bend into your left knee. You're going to reach your arms up, but just notice what happens to your ribs. If your lower ribs want to fly apart, you knit those lower ribs together and let your arms move independently of your rib cage. And that left heel kind of has a little sense of dragging back, turning on that hamstring. And then release. Relax that. So any questions or things that you've noticed with those warrior poses?
Mm-hmm. I must not have really good balance because I had to hold on to something in order to keep my balance.
In which one? In both of them?
Both of them in those poses.
And that's okay.
I mean, I still could feel this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the muscles working, but I couldn't stand up without holding on to something.
And that's like paying attention to the position of your feet. But you can definitely have something there to hold on to. Like have a chair available all the time.
Yeah,
You're just kind of moving around with you.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. And your muscles will get stronger the more you use them.
Okay.
Right? But, you know, as we age, like all of that muscle strength really is use it or lose it. Like, you know, it's super forgiving when we're young until we reach about 40. And then once we're 40, like it's all really use it or lose it. If we're not engaging muscles, then our body will not spend the energy to take care of them. It's just like, I don't need to take care of this. I'm not using it. And so it's so helpful. That's why, I mean, could you guys feel so many different muscles working in your legs when you're doing those warrior poses? That's one of the beauties of yoga, is that it uses every muscle that we have when we're doing those. Okay, so let's go back. We're going to do some hamstring openings. So have either a chair handy, blocks handy, if you know that you've got tight hamstrings. And we're just going to do triangle pose, and we'll do pyramid pose. So we'll just enter a hamstring stretch from both warrior 2 and warrior 1. So we'll start with warrior 2. I'll have my chair ready. And I've got a block. So just check yourself out. And, you know, this will start to become second nature, right? But we're always wanting to make sure that we develop the habit that our knees track the same direction as our toes. Always. And you're turning on your muscles to support your body. So we don't just hang here, right? But you don't have to do it so much that you're just like clenching and shaking. So you could think of, okay, I'm going to squeeze my legs toward each other as hard as I can and find like 100% effort there. And then see if you can relax to maybe 70% effort. And that's kind of where we're going to stay, just to support ourselves. And as we move into triangle, straighten through that right leg. Now, our knees, some people can really hyperextend through your knee. And it's all of this muscle that supports your knee joint. So you're going to turn your muscles on. Even though your hamstring is straightening and lengthening, feel like you're pulling that right heel back to turn it on, okay? And then you can find your triangle. And maybe you're just gonna lean part way down, really push into your right big toe ball mound, but turn on your right glute so that you've got support all through that whole right leg. Push through your left heel, and maybe you come here. I want you to hinge at your hip crease and not worry about folding too deeply. So here today, we're just gonna think about coming laterally over. So maybe hand can come to shin. Maybe you have your chair or couch. Okay. You can reach. And you can experiment with different depths. But I want you really just to spend some time here and feel what feels like it's useful for you. Like you're opening up this hamstring on that right side, but you're protecting the stability of your joints and you're not hanging into your hip or your knees. And so you can play with different heights. And maybe after a few breaths, you can come down, maybe hand to shin. But I want you really to think of the length of your spine and the integrity of your joints. So don't come to a place that hurts in your hip or your knee. And you have a little, no one would see it, but you just got like a tiny bend in the back of that knee where you've got some engagement in the back of that leg. And then go ahead and come on up, and we'll just switch sides. So you can find your chair or your block or whatever. But you can start with that warrior two stance. Just make sure that and it's helpful with bent knees to see that your knees are tracking the same direction as your toes. Then you can straighten that left leg, hinge at your hip crease. So you'll draw that outer hip back as you fold. And, just depending on your hip mobility here, your heart may aim toward the floor. We're working toward aiming to the side. And just come to a place where you're feeling a stretch through your hamstring. And you can have that kind of like 70% engagement of drawing your feet toward each other. And you can always use bring your hand to the chair or block. And just notice, like you'll have all sorts of muscles turning on to keep your balance. And just feel, and notice where in your hamstring you feel the stretch. What part of your hamstring does this get into? Push into your right heel. Lengthen out through the crown of your head. And then feel like you're dragging that left heel back. And then go ahead and come on up. Toe heel your feet together. And we'll do pyramid pose. So we're going to straighten our front legs starting from warrior one this time. So you can do this facing your chair or have a block to bring the floor closer to you. Start with your right foot forward and your left foot back, and think about your feet being more like hip distance apart than on a tightrope. Okay. And we'll start in warrior one by bending into that right knee and then pushing back through your left heel. Laterally feel like you pull your legs apart so you're turning on all those muscles. And then you can kind of find some freedom in your pelvis by inner thighs in and back. Lift up through your lower belly. And then feel like you're pulling your right outer hip back to bring your legs straight. Okay? So let this movement, straightening of your knee, be initiated from your hip. Okay. Push into your right big toe ball mound, draw your outer right hip back, and then come forward. And feel the length through the back of your right hamstring. You can take a breath, maybe come halfway down. Find a place where you can just move with a straight spine. And then find a place to rest your hands. So maybe on a chair, maybe the couch, maybe a block. And we're gonna find a little bit of movement here because you've got like 3 hamstrings. So let your pelvis just kind of shift from side to side. So just like swing your hips over to the left and then swing your hips over to the right. So we're letting go of that square pelvis and just kind of swinging from side to side. And just feel how the different arrangements of your pelvis stretch different parts of your hamstring. And then find a place that's interesting. You don't even have to worry about your square pelvis, but I still want you to think of that engagement of pulling your feet away from each other, pushing your inner thighs back, lengthening through your heart. Feel that through the back of your leg. Maybe you can fold a little further. Maybe you've got hands on a block inside of that right foot. Push into your right big toe ball mound. Pull your right outer hip back. Reach your heart forward. Okay, and from here, we're gonna stretch our IT band. So your IT band is this really dense connective tissue that is kind of between your quad and your hamstring, down the outer thigh. So you have a couple of options. If you've got your chair here in front of you, you're just going to kind of toe heel your right foot to the right. So then you come so your legs are more crossed. So your left foot will come to the right and your right foot will come to the left. And you'll probably come on the pinky toe edge of that right foot. It's a little bit tricky for balance, so make sure you have something to hang on to. And that might be plenty stretch for your outer right leg. If it's not, you can just from this pyramid pose where we were, you can let your legs cross and turn to the right and have your legs farther apart in your cross. You'll probably be on the pinky toe edge of each of your feet, and your hands can be on blocks, side of your bed or couch, a chair. So still find that engagement. Your legs are crossed, but think of moving right foot to the right, left foot to the left, and pushing your inner thighs back and apart. And just stretch and breathe into this outer leg, but stay really engaged through your ankles. So your knees are still tracking the same direction as your toes. You're not letting your ankles sickle. And then unwind yourself however you're at, wherever you're at. And then we'll just come back up and switch sides. So step your left foot back in your little shorter stance for warrior one. Bend into that left knee. Feel like you're pulling your feet laterally away from each other, pushing your inner thighs back. Feel a lot of stabilization around that knee. And then by pulling your left outer hip back, bring that left leg towards straight. Push down into your left big toe ball mound and come forward into your forward fold. Any amount. So don't lock out your knee so much that you would hyperextend it, right? Engage all those muscles, but let your leg be as straight as it will go. And then just bring your hands down. And find those little sways of your pelvis. And just explore, move really slowly and mindfully. So you will feel your inner thighs, all those ropes of your hamstring as you just sway your pelvis from side to side. And then find a place that feels pretty stable and interesting for your stretch. And then you can pause there. And just keep returning to those engagements where your feet are pulling laterally apart, your inner thighs are pulling back. You're engaging the back of that left leg by kind of dragging that left heel back without moving it anywhere. So you're using your hamstring at the same time as you're lengthening it. It's eccentric contraction, a contraction at its length. And your hands can be wherever feels available for you, where you're feeling this in the back of your leg and not your lower back. Okay. And then wherever you are, if you've got a chair, for your IT band stretch, you can just kind of toe heel that left foot to the right. Okay, and so you're pulling this outer hip back, and then kind of cross your left foot over to the left. So your legs are crossed, and you'll be on the pinky edge of that left foot. You can flex through that foot so that your knee and toes are still pointing in the same direction, and pulling this outer hip back, and you should feel that stretch down the outer edge of your left leg. And that's all connective tissue there. And it helps to stretch this once we're warm. So you can stay here if you're feeling plenty. You don't feel like you're feeling anything. You can keep turning to your left with your legs crossed. And let your leg be crossed even further, and maybe hands on your block. And just stretch through that outer left leg. And let your exhales be long as you're here. And just move in a way that you can just feel that stretch in your outer left leg. And then soften through your knees, unwind yourself. And we can just stand up. Let's see. We're totally out of time. So does anyone have questions or observations about any of that? Oh, all right. Well, if you need to go, feel free to go. But it's always nice to check in with those assessments we did at the beginning and just feel your passive and active range of motion again. So if you want to, come on your back and lift that right leg up as high as it'll go. And then use your strap to bring it up. You can play with that. Find those natural curves of your spine and then just lift that leg up. And then you can use your strap just to see what your passive range is now and how it feels in your lower back after all of that engagement through your hamstring. See if there's a difference, and just check it out on the other side too. You can just check out your left leg active, range of motion, keeping the natural curves of your back. And then use your strap and check out your passive. And you can release. And if you feel like just laying in a shavasana for a while, go for it. Hi, Hannah. Good to see you. All right. Any thoughts, any questions? All right.